Hey, welcome back, folks, to the Ray program, 844-RAY show in particular. If you have a question for certified financial planner Lyn Rowe, who's hanging out with me. Hey there, Lyn. Now, you, unfortunately, were on the road, tied up in traffic, and didn't have an opportunity to listen to my very first segment, did you?
No, I did not.
Oh, you
Enlighten
know,
me.
Sometimes when you miss a segment, you miss a lot in this program.
I know.
I was talking about unlocking the immortality gene and some studies that have come out of Stanford and other universities. This was written by Michael Robinson. Discover the cure for aging and the company that will pay for your lifetime of treatments. Well, I'm not going to talk about the company because that would be tantamount to pitching a stock, which I don't do in this program. But he says here that because of scientific developments, we could all soon be able to wind back the hands of time to reverse the biological age of our bodies on a cellular level. We'll be able to return to the health and vitality we had in our 30s and stay that way indefinitely. Now, wouldn't that be great if that happened? You're in the business of helping people pay for their care. What he says later on in this report is, yes, there is a likelihood that we will get to this at some point in our lifetimes, perhaps our grandkids' lifetimes, at a cost of an additional $40,000 per year, which probably exceeds the average retiree's budget. Now, I'm not here to ask you about, you know, your scientific opinion on this subject, because you're in the risk management business, not the science business.
I am not a scientist.
So, so the question then is, assuming this doesn't come to fruition, like in the next 6 months or 6 days, what are people to do about the whole issue of healthcare and long-term care?
Well, it's a good question, right? The problem today, as we see it, is that 21% of Americans right now will be informal caregivers. 21.
Informal caregivers.
Right.
What is an informal caregiver?
Family member, friend, and they have either been volunteered or they volunteer to become a caregiver. And my question for our listeners, Ray, is, has someone volunteered you to be a caregiver and you haven't really signed up for that job?
Yeah, I think it is important because, and I have a friend that's going through this right now, and I see it all the time. You know, I was watching, what was it, The Voice, or one of those, you know, shows that I don't watch too many shows, but I kind of dig that one. You know, the musician in me.
Of course.
Yeah, I got the music in me. Anyway, I'm trying to remember now because I kind of do my work and show prep while I watch at the same time, so I'm multitasking. But I believe one of the really talented singers had really left work and was taking care of his elderly father, or not so elderly father, who had something. And I'm going, man, this kid's got so much talent, or young man has so much talent. And I hope he wins something on The Voice, because how else is this guy going to be able to make a real living while taking care of his elderly father who has some kind of an ailment? I wish I'd have paid closer attention.
You know, you bring up a good point. I mean, the stats say that 61% of these caregivers are women. They're over 65 themselves, and they have full-time jobs. But there are a lot of guys out there being caregivers too. So the typical designee is the family female. It could be your wife, could be sister, could be daughter, but the reality is that that person's going to really give up their lives, which is exactly what you're talking about. There's no chance when you become a caregiver. I mean, the stats of what happens when somebody is working, they have to change their hours, they have to cut back their hours, they have to come in late, leave early, then there's time on the phone. I mean, there's so much involved in being that caregiver that you can't possibly do justice to a career path.
Okay, on that subject, I was reading on Wall Street yesterday, as a matter of fact, and they wrote an article, 15 Best Practices for Protecting Elder Clients. So I wanted to ask you about that specifically, not necessarily relating to this article, but just in general terms, because you work with elderly, not all, but a lot of your clients are over the age of 60 or 65. So I guess that's considered more elderly,
Or
although
they're headed in that direction.
or I mean, I would certainly take issue with the term elderly.
Yeah.
But having said that,
It's not a good one.
best practices. All right. So how does an elderly individual, can they protect themselves to make sure they're not getting bamboozled?
With regard to the insurance or
With
the care
regard to,
itself?
yeah, I would say with regard to the purchase of long-term health care insurance, making sure they're getting the right product from the right person with the right definitions and all that stuff.
Right. Well, the first thing is working with a broker as opposed to an agent from a particular company. That's the absolute first thing. Somebody who has the ability to offer a product from virtually any company, unless they're a captive agent company. And those captive agent companies, of course, don't let brokers help sell their product. So they're pretty restrictive. But if you're working with a broker, all brokers get the same price for the same product from the same carriers. You don't get a break.
Okay, so let me just clarify.
Sure.
So there are captive agents. That's where you work for one company and represent that company's product. And if you go outside of those highly defined lines or clearly defined lines, then you probably get fired. I mean, not allowed to sell other people's
Not
products.
supposed to do that.
You represent that one product. And then there are brokers who can represent multiple products, but may not have access to that single line product.
Right. Now, what we do, first of all, is we will pre-qualify somebody, because that's a key to find out if they can get the coverage, and if they can get the coverage, who is most likely to give them the best rates because of their health history. So we gather that information, share it anonymously with the carriers, so that the carriers come back and give me, thumbs up or thumbs down or maybe kind of information. Once we have that on the table, we know who the carriers are that we want to work with and who we don't want to work with. Once we've narrowed that down, then we do the side-by-side comparison, and we can compare with those captive agent contracts, which is good to know, because if somebody's thinking about looking with, XYZ company or ABC company that's a private carrier that does captive agent contracts only, then we can see side by side, are they competitive?
Okay, so what I guess the modern analogy would be eBay. So you have your own little eBay for trying to determine which company is going to make the best offer, because this isn't about, looking at a product off the shelf. No. Because there's a lot that goes into what they call underwriting, which I guess is why you need to have somebody like Lyn Rowe who does this. All right, so we've got to take a break, but when we come back, you had some really important stuff you wanted to cover, and we will do that as soon as you tell everybody what it is.
Well, what we're going to be talking about is, if you are that family caregiver, if you're the designated family caregiver, what is your life going to look like?
What is your life going to look like?
Yeah.
How about life expectancy? Can we talk about that?
Absolutely.
All right, so don't go away. Lyn Rowe, certified financial planner. One of the most important decisions you will ever make, because if you haven't unlocked the immortality gene just yet, which you could, and we hope that you do, wouldn't it be nice if we never ever needed long-term care? But in the meantime, it's going to affect 70% of us. That's right, 7-0. Lyn Rowe's here to help you with that. When we come back, don't go away. If you have a question for Lyn, dial her up right now, 844-RAY-SHOW. Send me an email, too, because I can get them over to her lickety-split. I do it all the time. RayLucia.com, RayLucia.com. Just click on the Ask Ray button. We'll be back with Lyn right after this. Hey, welcome back. The Ray Lucia Show with Lyn Rowe, CFP. All right, Lyn, of course, you're in the business of helping people make good decisions about their post-retirement health care. Sometimes it's pre-retirement, but for the most part, it's post-retirement health care. And what a lot of people don't realize is they are going to be thrust into the job of being a caregiver, whether they want to or not in many instances. Now, one of the things that has fascinated me about this field, having studied it, learning from you really over the last 2 decades, is the fact that the caregiver themselves has a high preponderance of getting ill, more so than a non-caregiver. And we're not talking about the caregiver that does that job for a living. We're talking about what did you call this caregiver? The something or other? The caregiver that wasn't supposed to be the caregiver. Yeah. I don't know. You had some kind of a phrase for it. I don't know what it is. But anyway, you went to school.
Informal.
The informal. Thank you. You never went to school to study to be a caregiver.
That's right.
It just happened because mom or dad or a husband or a child or someone needed care. Talk about that.
Well, the stats are showing that more women than men are doing it, but I'll tell you what, I've been in classes where guys have spoken up and said, you know what, I took care of my mom for 10 years, or I took care of my folks for, I hear this every day from adults who say, yeah, I was the caregiver. And you can hear the exhaustion in their voice. If you're the designated caregiver and don't even know it, that's the sad part, because then you've got a whole lifestyle change ahead of you that you don't know about. Grandkids are going to get neglected. Kids are going to get neglected. Husband's going to get neglected. Your job's going to get neglected. Your health is going to get neglected, simply because you are there for somebody 24/7. And
now, when you say, I'm sorry to interrupt, when you say you're the designated caregiver, what does that mean? I mean, is that like you drew the short straw or what?
That's basically it. Family members either talk about it openly and say, okay, well, I'll do this or I'll do that or whatever. Even under those circumstances, if you have 3 kids that say, okay, we'll step up to the plate, isn't going to happen. If you got 3 kids, it's going to be 0, 0, and 100% every time. It's never going to be 33 and a third, exception in your family.
I think we've done a pretty good job with that. We have the five
exception
kids,
in your
all
family.
sort of, but we all live within 10 minutes of my father, so it's a lot easier. If somebody lives in Virginia and they have to get to California, it's going to be hard.
Exactly.
And then trying to milk money out of them to try to pay for the stuff is even more difficult.
Well, and that's the other thing that you bring up a good point. The whole thing of money. People think, well, I have enough money. I can self-insure. We can hire caregivers. I want to be at home. I don't want to go to a facility. I don't want to go to skilled nursing. I want to be at home, but we can hire somebody. You're not going to be there to administer the plan. You're going to be trying to feel better. Your family's going to be administering the plan. And what are they going to do? First thing, they're going to try to do it themselves every time. Wife's going to try to do it until she finally caves. And then she calls the kids and says, I can't do this. I need help. One of the kids will step up to the plate, and not necessarily voluntarily, might be grudgingly. And that's one of the issues. The caregivers have experienced this stress, the amount of stress. The number one stress is being angry or frustrated with a family member because they can't do things, or they wander off, or they forget things. And then the guilt, the incredible guilt, because you are the caregiver. You're not supposed to be unkind to that person or short with that person. Your entire relationship with that person, if it's your dad or your brother or your uncle, it's going to change. You're not going to be the daughter-in-law anymore. You're not going to be the daughter anymore. You're going to be the caregiver. And you have to emotionally distance yourself as best you can. But inside, it's going on. The stress is continuing to go on. And hypertension and depression are huge results of being a caregiver.
So the caregiver ends up getting sick. Now here's what I want you to do before we go on here. I want you to go to Lyn's website. I want my LTC.net. I want my LTC.net. She's got all kinds of information that she can send you, give you, talk with you about. This is so absolutely critical, because if you end up being the caregiver, your life expectancy shortens. Talk about that.
That's exactly right. Fidelity just came out with a study not too long ago that said the life of the caregiver is shorter than it would be if they weren't a caregiver, and shorter than the person that they're caregiving for. So that's a huge problem. Another thing, Ray, is I said earlier that people who can self-insure, think, okay, I can do that. The family hasn't bought into that plan necessarily. They don't know what your resources are. They're not going to be able to decide, to liquidate the things that you would have liquidated. And chances are they're just not going to do it. They're going to try to do it themselves. But if you have long-term care insurance, the first thing they do is they pull out that policy. They find out what kind of care you've got in that plan, and then they call the insurance company. And the insurance company steps in, and I don't care which company it is, they're going to step in and they're going to help you with a plan of care. They're going to help you, refer you to professional caregivers that they vetted, the neighborhood knows that they're good, that kind of thing. And then you're going to have a plan coordinator that's going to be able to oversee the caregiving. So the family can breathe a sigh of relief. Yes, they're going to help out. They're going to be there at night when you need to get up and go to the bathroom. But at least during the daytime, they weren't rushing around trying to do the laundry, fix the meals, take you to the restroom, get you cleaned up, take you to the doctor, all those other things on top of being there at night.
It is a big job. There's no question about it. And, I've talked about my father many times in this program, and we're exceptionally blessed because he is still at almost 90 in pretty darn good health.
Yeah.
Memory's slipping a little bit, but not that much really in the grand scheme of things. For somebody that's 90, he's doing pretty good. So it makes it a lot easier. But if he needed 24/7 care, I can see where that stress level goes way up, because everybody has families that they're trying to support.
Yep.
In our case, we have our existing kids and then our grandkids, and trying to divide our time amongst all of them. This one's got a swim meet, this one's got a baseball game, this one's got a dance recital, and you want to be there.
And it drives a wedge between your kids. You can't know how it will divide them, because one who has stepped up to the plate, who is single, or they don't have the family, or they're closer, or whatever the reason is that they become the designated caregiver, they're the ones that start building up the resentment. And eventually it just separates them. You weren't there for me.
So we've got to talk about, the cost of doing this, because obviously you're in the long-term health care business, helping people afford this. So it's pay me now or pay me later. How much do I have to pay you?
Well, you don't have to pay me anything. You're going to pay the insurance company whatever plan you buy. And we're going to find the best, most affordable coverage with the best possible care that we can for you. That's the bottom line. That's my goal every time. When I talk to my clients, I'm looking for the best for the least.
Yeah, so when you talk about the best for the least, once upon a time there were dozens of companies that did this. Now they're shrinking by leaps and bounds. I mean, there's what, a handful of them left?
There are actually more than people think, but across the country, but there are some states where they're pretty restrictive. California is one of them, what can I say? But we still have good alternatives. We have really good alternatives to look at.
Now, this is something that's not covered by Medicare.
No.
So it's important to realize that once you are on Medicare, your problems for long-term care don't go away unless you have virtually no assets, correct?
Correct. Well, the assets part is Medicaid. Remember, Medicaid is where you have spent down your assets and you become medically indigent. That's what it is. And then Medicaid will pay for your care in a skilled nursing home. They're not going to pay for your care at home. They're not going to pay for your care in assisted living. It's going to be skilled nursing. And that may not be the place you want to be. May not be the place that your family wants you to be.
Most people don't. Most of the folks that I've bumped into in my lengthy career, they want to stay at home.
Exactly.
They want to stay at home.
Of the claims for long-term care with all carriers are at home.
Yeah, and I mentioned this last week when I had my surgery a few years back, and I wasn't bedridden because I had to sort of sit up in my lounge chair, or whatever you want to call it, one of those lazy boy kind of chairs, and it was leather or leatherette. I don't think we can afford leather at the time, but anyway, it was quite uncomfortable. And after a couple of days of that, I told my wife, because she was trying to help the dance studio and work with this and work all that, I said, just call in the nurse. And it was fantastic. It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah. The nurse was there whenever I needed her, although she wasn't sitting there like staring at me all day.
Right, but you don't feel guilty asking her for something because she's doing something else. That's her job.
Plus, she was really cute.
Oh, stop.
I'm just kidding. Lyn Rowe, certified financial planner. This may be one of the most important phone calls you ever make. And Lyn's going to give out the number right now.
877-270-3127.
877-270-3127. Seriously, this is a serious, serious situation for 70% of us, and we don't know the 30% who will be unaffected by either yourself or a family member needing long-term care. Go to iwantmyltc.net.